Yasher Koach, to Aria, to your parents and grandparents, to your friends and family. What beautifully led Torah service. You can breathe a little bit. We're going to do just a few minutes of learning together. I had a meeting this week, continuing my hopeful effort within the first year as rabbi in this congregation to meet one-on-one with every congregant. If we haven't yet had a chance to do that, I look forward to doing it. I've got a few more months left. I had a meeting with a lovely couple, been here since the beginning. He said, we are deeply committed to Jewish life. But he said, Rabbi, I have a question for you. He said, I am so proud to be a Jew. I am so proud to be a part of this community. But good Lord, some of these stories. Am I really supposed to believe that the right thing was for Abraham to try to sacrifice his son? He said there's a whole story in there about a woman who gets married to one brother and he dies, and another brother and he dies, and then she marries the father and really? He said, I like the Ten Commandments. It's not in shul this morning, but he would have heard it. But there's a whole lot in here that feels really morally questionable. Rabbi, do you have an answer for that? And the truth is, I have a bunch of answers for that. One of which is, yeah, some of this stuff. But there are some more sophisticated answers to offer too. One of which is that Revelation, what we read about this morning, where God comes and announces God's truth from Mount Sinai, is, I believe, an imperfect process. Because revelation, a message from God, has to get filtered through us. And as we all learned in kindergarten, playing the game of telephone, where I whisper a message to you and you whisper it to the next and you whisper it to the next, once a message has passed through a variety of minds and a variety of hands, there's always some changes, some stuff that accumulates along the way. The message that winds up being the final one sometimes bears only a passing resemblance to the original idea. We human beings get involved in the process of taking in God's words. And the product that we put out is inevitably different than what God first imagined for us, because it's mixed up with our human faults and foibles. This happens from the very beginning. If you got a text sheet, you can look at it with me. If not, you can take my word for it. Back in the Garden of Eden, the first human being, the first Adam, is given one commandment, one thing that he's supposed to not do, which is to eat from the tree at the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. And God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat it, for as soon as you eat of it, you will die. He had one rule. And he's supposed to, by the way, pass this message along to his wife. And he does. But it turns out he doesn't pass it along exactly as given. Because if you fast forward another chapter, you've got Eve in conversation with that tricky snake. And the snake says to the woman, did God really say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman replied to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It's only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat it or touch it, lest you die. Where'd that touch it come from? Right? That's not in the original commandment. The original commandment is don't eat it. Maybe she added it, or maybe, and this is what our rabbis say, Adam added it. Why did Adam add that additional thou shalt not to his wife? Because, as everyone knows, women are not to be trusted. And so we should be really careful to keep her far away from even touching the tree, lest she find herself committing the offense. And so he tells her not to touch it. But look, it backfires. Because the snake crawls up in the tree and says, I'm touching it, and nothing's happening to me. And Eve says, well, if it is that we can touch the tree, maybe we're allowed to eat from it too. And she takes that forbidden fruit, and the rest, as they say, is history. Maybe he didn't trust his partner well enough, that Adam, to tell her the message that he got from God. Maybe he thought he knew a little bit better about how to protect poor, pitiful Eve from herself. Not so good. We have another example of that in this week's Parsha. And God said to Moses, go to the people and warn them to stay pure today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothes, let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, God will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. God is getting ready, getting the community ready for everybody to receive revelation directly. The whole community gathered up at the base of Mount Sinai tells Moses, pass this message along to tell the people to get ready. And Moses comes down the mountain to the people and warns the people to stay pure, and they wash their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. You should not go near a woman, lest impurity result. God gives a message to the whole people. Tell the whole people to be ready to hear my word. And Moses takes that in and walks down the mountain and says, listen up, guys. This is how, men, you should make sure that you are pure to be ready to hear God's word. God's message is a message of radical inclusivity. Everybody is included. But Moses, a man of his time 3,000 years ago, can't in himself conceive that God could have a message for women and men equally. And so Moses adds his own little spin on the message. Moses directs it to the audience that Moses assumes God meant. And all of a sudden, this message of a radically inclusive covenant embracing all loses 50% of the intended listeners. Dr. Judith Plasko, writing in a book called Standing Again at Sinai, a really important book of feminist Jewish theology, writes, the text evokes a continuing sense of exclusion and disorientation in women. The whole Jewish people supposedly stood at Sinai. Were we there? Were we not there? If we were there, what did we hear when the men heard, don't go near a woman? And if we weren't there originally, can we be there now? God's message is a message for all. And human beings, in our narrowness, project narrowness on God. We make God smaller than God ought to be. We make God more exclusive. We make the message of our religions more exclusive. We engage in this game of religious triumphalism, each religion saying, we have the exclusive truth. It can't possibly be that others would have it too, their own versions. We take a voice, which is a voice that embraces all, and we make it small. So what did I say to this gentleman who said, what about these really yucky stories? Am I supposed to believe that they come from God? And I said, if I had to believe they came from God, I couldn't be a religious Jew. If I had to believe that each and every word of the Torah is put down exactly as God intended it, then the morally right thing to do with a book that says, kill every man, woman, child, and animal of the Canaanites, stone gay people and disobedient children, I would have to walk away. But if I can believe, and the Torah can actually show me examples, that the message we have is a message of radical and inclusive love that gets filtered through human beings who have not always been known for radical inclusive love. And that my job in reading Torah is to excavate, to pull away, to chip away the human pieces that make Torah narrow and allow Torah to speak in its authentic voice, to allow God to speak in God's authentic voice. If I am not to be a passive receiver of Torah, but an active participant in finding the light and the goodness that I know, I believe with my whole heart, and have staked my life on the idea, lives at its center, then that's a project for me and God to share. I bring this text this morning with the feeling that this is our work. This is the work of every Jew. This is the work, Aria, that you enter into as the newest adult member of our covenant. Your job is to look at these words and to dig into them, to wrestle with them, to question them, to find in them core truth, an essential message that the rest of us need to hear, and to reject theologies and philosophies that make us narrow, that make God narrow, and instead try to get back to a place of a God who says at Sinai, bring together the whole people, everyone without exception, because we have something to talk about. Shabbat Shalom.